That's human nature, isn't it? Because it's what we've always been. There may even be a God gene. Some people, I think the Daily Telegraph recently published a speculative, slightly cheeky piece indicating that belief is so fundamental a part of the human metabolism that perhaps atheism should be classified as a mental illness. You can imagine the chatter that resulted as a result of that. But, objectively, there is a case to be made. So, of course, these people recognize that they're missing something. But the problem often is that for psychic or nationalistic or tribal, sometimes racial reasons, they can't see where the truth actually is. And one of the things I'm trying to reach for in the book is that God's truth, thanks to another of those great historic ironies, is placed in our age precisely where the elites least expect it to be. It's like I gave a talk recently about the Holy Grail, and Europeans for centuries have been kind of scratching around, probably not far from where you are at the moment in France. The Nazis were digging away in those caves in southern France trying to find the Grail. And just last week in Glastonbury, somebody tried to dig up the tomb of King Arthur to see if the Grail was there. It's a kind of permanent obsession. Wow. But according to the historians, the roots of the Grail legend are most likely to be found in Islam because it's the black stone in the Kaaba. And many historians say this is what it is. And the medieval European legends recognize this. Even Wagner in his letters says, well, isn't it a shame that our great German legends actually turn out to be of Saracenic origin? When he was writing his great Parsifal. But the Grail is available. This thing that the Europeans have always been looking for most is the black stone. So it's kind of hidden in plain sight, if you like. You can see it. You don't need to dig around in Provence. You can see it if you go on the National Geographic Channel, and there it is. But it's in the wrong place for the European ego. Because the point of the Grail search, and for any traditional pilgrimage, we're in the Hajj days, of course, now, is that it is about the outward enactment of the inward journey, which is about overcoming ego. Superbia, pride, is the worst of the deadly sins. And it is generally Europe's pride that says, well, I can go through any of these ordeals, and I'm happy to scale Mount Doom and fight with black dragons and deal with the Green Knight like Sir Gawain, and I'm a real warrior. But when you say, well, you can get to the Grail temple, you can kiss the Grail if you like, but you have to say 7 words in Arabic in order to be allowed in. They say, oh, well, I don't fancy that ordeal, thank you very much. I'd rather fight with a black dragon in Mount Doom or something. That's my kind of ordeal. So this is a divine irony that the Grail is there, and it is understood, and it is the traditional yearning for the European soul. Which is not really a Christian legend. It's kind of, it is from Islam. It's certainly not biblical, but it's the pride of Europe. It makes it so difficult for them really to consider that actually God may be placing his secret in our age, in the place that they are most habituated to despise, with all of those sort of Bangladeshis and Saudis. They can't imagine it could be there of all places.
Well, indeed. And one of the great ironies of all this is that the traditional Christian faith, which is precipitously declining, at least in the UK, we're looking at church attendance in the Church of England, it's in free fall. These people follow a Jew from Palestine from 2,000 years ago who wasn't white, who didn't speak English probably, and who culturally and linguistically, semantically, Aramaic is cognate with Arabic and Hebrew. He had much more in common with a certain 7th century Arabian prophet than the Archbishop of Canterbury or Tom Wright, and yet they see him, Jesus, as part of their history, and somehow have a problem with a very similar character who taught basically the same thing just down the road in Arabia. I find that ironic.
Well, it's again rooted in prejudice, and you have to remember how fiercely Europe always self-defined as being that which is not Islamic. Islam, by this miraculous, historically unique process, came out of those Arabian valleys, and within 100 years it was in southern France and the gates of China, and this is the great trauma of traditional Europe. I was reading recently a story of a 16th century Protestant in North Germany who said, well, clearly the Turks are the most powerful country in the world. We know that they treat the Christians well and allow different sects to coexist, unlike us in Germany. So I think it's wrong, biblically, to fight against them because we're supposed to be pacifists. We should let the Turks invade, and Christianity will do better here than it does under these warring Catholic and Protestant princes. And for that, of course, he was horribly tortured and put to death, and they danced on his grave. Because
what's his name, by the way? Do you recall?
I can find it for you if you like. I don't recall the poor guy's name.
I'm sure we would like to look at that's extraordinary.
This is the great unthought of Europe, because the great pilgrimage centre of Western Europe is Santiago de Compostela, isn't it? And
not far from me, in Lourdes, actually, it's about an hour and a half drive.
Lourdes, yeah, but Santiago is much bigger, and medieval English people would go there, and the Camino is a big thing. When you get there to a rather, in my view, over Baroque and elaborate bling church, at the centre of it, there's the big statue of St. James, and his title is St. James Matamoros, the Muslim killer.
Wow.
So the destination of Western Europe's big sacred pilgrimage is this big statue, and he has a white face. He's on his horse, and with his sword, he's cutting the heads off these rather sad-looking, dark-skinned Muslims who are being trampled underfoot. And nowadays, the church finds it a bit unecumenical and embarrassing. So you can see that they arrange flowers to kind of disguise these sad-looking Muslims.
I'm sure
He's still the patron saint of Spain. St. James, the Muslim killer. And that's so deeply rooted in the DNA, even of quite secular people, I think, like Douglas Murray and so forth, that it's just very, very hard. But there are people, even from the far right in Europe, who have made the leap into Islam publicly or privately. I'm in conversation with some really nationalistic people in Europe, quite well-known people who have Wikipedia pages and a kind of Twitter storm whenever they say something, who have discreetly come to Islam, or at least recognize that Islam is the truth. So one should never despair of those people. And you call them, I believe, will be a very good Mahmoud when he finally overcomes this Matamoros DNA and humbles himself before the Lord of Abraham.
That would be a day to rejoice. So it was you that coined this term, submarines.
Yep.
What are submarines?
Submarines are those people of, we don't know how many they are, who convert to Islam and do it, but without announcing it to anybody. I even knew a Jewish guy, whose wife was very puzzled that at kind of 4 o'clock in the morning, he would mysteriously get up out of bed and come back 10 minutes later, a little bit damp. And she couldn't figure out what this was about. Went on for years. But yes, I know a full professor here in Cambridge who's been a Muslim. Occasionally you see him discreetly in the mosque, but he's certainly not known to be Muslim. And I know a guy who is the senior advisor to a cabinet minister in the current government who is an active convert to Islam, but I think nobody in Boris's team suspect this. There's quite a lot of them. And the idea is that they want the beauty of Islam and they love the form of prayer and the purity of the monotheism and what's not to like. But all of the kind of crisis talk about Muslim communities and Palestine and Afghanistan and so forth, they don't feel that they want to take on the psychobabble that goes with it. So they keep quiet about it. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of people like that.
I find it interesting that and fascinating that in Europe, prominent, as you say, far-right, populist, non-Muslim leaders privately contact you and discreetly send out feelers in a very positive, constructive way and exploring faith. And I think that's an extraordinary ministry, to use Christian language, that you have to the world.
Well, it's a very passive one because I don't go out. You know, I've not emailed somebody like Milo Yiannopoulos and drawn the merits of the Quran to his attention. Sometimes
you mean Milo, the Anglo-American,
who's now got religion and repented of his former orientation and has become.
It's kind of a good point.
Anyway, is a kind of ultra traditionalist Catholic of the sort of, if you watch Church Militant and those Catholic websites, you can see he's part of that world. Well, But yes, I mean, the fact is that Muslims do dichotomize and assume that those people are kind of soulless androids who we just have to insult and push away. But everybody has a soul. Everybody was there at the day of the primordial covenant when we all said, yes, we bear witness. Everybody, therefore, is thirsty for God, and we shouldn't despair of anyone. And that's part of the beauty of the seerah, even when the Holy Prophet was being persecuted and his companions tortured and killed, he would pray in what seemed like the most unlikely way. Strengthen Islam by Abdal Hakim or Omar, the two great Islamophobes of the age, and Omar came to Islam by God's decree. And I think that's a more healthy place for us to be in da'wah terms than just Twitter storming people and responding to their abuse with more abuse. I think that the Quran says, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and goodly exhortation. And that's a commandment that I think is binding on us.
Yes. We'll come on perhaps to the dawah scene in the UK shortly, but just perhaps moving on the conversation to something that is summarized in this ghastly term, wokeism. What is wokeism? I don't know. It's kind of a new form of political correctness, but it seems to have become a cultural revolution now, and focusing on issues of gender, of sexualities, particularly doing away, in my understanding, with traditional definitions of gender. And people now seem to, it's not acceptable for people to define their own personal agenda by their beliefs about their agenda. So if I think I'm a woman, then I really am a woman, and people should accept that. And doctors and powers that be will all say, yep, this person is a woman. And this kind of redefinition of reality, I mention this because it obviously affects all of us, but particularly regarding Muslims in the West, in Britain, France, America, and so on, who are coming under pressure, of course, because Muslims are quite traditionalist and conservative when it comes to sexuality, the place of intercourse within heterosexual marriage, and gender roles are quite clearly defined and celebrated and accentuated rather than, I don't know, smoothed over in an egalitarian kind of mishmash of everyone is universally the same. But am I right in thinking this is becoming a serious issue for Muslims, particularly those with children whose children are now being, I might say, brainwashed by their teachers in the States?
Well, yeah, I don't see it as a specifically Muslim issue, but I think it's something that people who want to maintain the traditional idea of gender dimorphism, which seems to be implicit in all the world's scriptures, you know, Taoism and Hindu religion, they all assume that reality is dyadic and that the mysterium tremendum and the mysterium fascinans are part of the nature of existence, and it is through their interaction that the miracle of life comes about, as you can see in most of the species around us, and that's kind of always assumed to be the case. So, but it is, and there are a lot of Christians. If you look at the organization Christian Concern, they often champion individuals who've been persecuted, really, that's the word, because of what is now called heteronormativity. Yeah. So, I mean, I could mention a friend of mine, somebody I consider a friend, Bernard Randall, who used to be chaplain of one of the colleges here in Cambridge, Christ's College. Very decent guy, mildly conservative evangelical perhaps, but very open and courteous. He got a job as RE teacher at a school with an evangelical heritage and was overheard to indicate that according to the Church of England, marriage is between one man and one woman.
Which is the truth, isn't it? That is the official teaching.
That is, it's on their website. So not only do they fire him, but they also refer him to prevent. Yes. Can you imagine? As if saying that the Church of England says this, which is just a fact, means that you're potentially a terrorist suspect. Well, of course, prevent, they throw it out because they can see this is really didn't meet their threshold, as it were. But then, and the kids in the school, the conservative Christians, are saying, is this a compulsory belief that heteronormativity is wrong and that we have to be against it? Is it obligatory now? And it's a source of distress, evidently, for some of them and for their parents. And then Bernard contacts to his supporters Lambeth Palace to find out what the Archbishop of Canterbury has to say about what is on the Anglican Church's website. And the Archbishop of Canterbury declines to intervene and says, well, it's terribly complicated, you have to understand all sides, and the usual prevarication. So he won't defend his own priest and effectively throws him to the lions just for saying what the teaching of the church historically is and continues to be. So that's the, Christians are facing this as well. But interestingly, the same Archbishop, you may recall at the Batley cartoons scandal a few months ago, when those outrageous cartoons were being brandished to Muslim pupils in a school, the Archbishop said, no, I believe in freedom of speech. Look at, this is the priority that Lambeth Palace seems to have now, that Muslim pupils can be offended, but students who believe in heteronormativity just have to be smacked and silenced. That seems to be their view.